Good afternoon, Ms. Kane. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, sir.
Right. I think we're ready to resume.
Thank you, my lord. We were talking about DMA Canyon, Ms. Kane. Just a few more points of detail before we leave that. You described getting the 2015 report from the Chief Executive, Jane Grant, having been asked to come and see her. Was it the 2015 report you got in 2018 at that meeting, or did you also get the 2017 report?
Oh, right. Ms. Kane, I thought I heard you responding to me. I wonder if the mute is still on. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
I hear you, but less distinctly than I would have expected.
Hold on and I'll see if I can, sorry sir, see if I can put the volume up. I haven't changed any of the settings since we last, no, I can't put it up any further. Would it help if I spoke up?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
No.
I'm hearing you, but not as loudly as we did formerly.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you very clearly. Thank you.
Right, okay.
I'm sorry, we didn't hear the answer to the question I was asking you as to what you received from Miss Grant at the meeting that you said took place in or around May 2018. Was it the 2015 DMA Canyon report, or did you also get the 2017 one, which we know didn't appear until sometime in 2018?
No, it was the 2015 report I received from Miss Grant. When I went over to the QE to speak to Mr Gallagher and Mr Powery about this report, to ask them if any of them knew about this report, why we hadn't discussed it, etc. That's when I learned that there had also been a risk assessment completed in 2017, which had not been received at that point.
Right. Did you take the opportunity of reading through the 2015 DMA Canyon report?
Yes, I looked at it, yes.
And you're asked in your witness statement, what was the consequence if what was in the report wasn't actioned? Can you just tell us what your position is on that?
So there were a number of things in the 2015 report that required to be acted upon, and they required to be acted on quickly, either within a month or within 3 months of receipt of the risk assessment on the basis of the risk that had been attached by the risk assessors. Those issues related to dead legs, vessels not being passed through in nature, temperature, multiple temperature excursions, and a number of defects round about, things like valves. So there were a range of things on it that could have led to microbiological proliferation in the water system.
And put another way, do you accept that not dealing with these matters could have created a risk to patient safety?
Yes.
In due course, did you take the opportunity of reading the 2017 report when it appeared?
Yes.
Can you remember when it appeared? Was it much longer after your meeting with Miss Grant, or a lot longer?
No, I don't think it actually was that much longer afterwards. I certainly had instructed the 2018 one before that one was received, but I don't think it was that long afterwards. I think it was received because I asked for it to be chased up by Mr. Gallagher with the MA Canyon.
And did you read that report, the 2017 one?
Yes, it was very similar to the 2015 report.
So it was identifying things that could have caused, I think, as you put it, microbiological proliferation, or
Yes.
as I suggested to you, risk to patient safety.
Yes.
Thank you. Can I just jump ahead for a minute and just ask you another question, which while it's in my head, by the time you came to leave the post that you were occupying that related to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, had these water issues been resolved?
The water issues had not been fully resolved. I took up a separate role in 2019, at the end of 2019, which no longer involved estates management, and it didn't have any, any locus on what was happening with water system in the south, because my base changed to Clyde sector within NHS, Greater Glasgow and Clyde. But there were ongoing works still happening within Ward 2A and 2B in relation to the water system. But when we received the 15, the 17, and then the 2018 report, there was a gap analysis completed and an evidence base established to close down each individual task to ensure that everything had been addressed that had been raised through the 2 risk assessments.
Thank you. Well, can we move on to another topic with a short excursion, if we may, into cleaning? Now, you were asked about that at 4, 5, 6 of your witness statement. And the essential dispute here appears to be that Dr. Inkster is saying, well, yes, cleaning issues were taken seriously, but they were reactive rather than proactive. And you say, no, you don't agree, because there was a lot of work going on anyway, regardless of what was being raised with us. Is that a summary of what you've got there?
Yes.
Now, did cleaning issues continue to be a challenge continuing into 2018? In other words, after you were back?
But it was after my return to work in 2017. I was asked, part of the dedicated piece of work that I was asked to complete by Mr. Loudon was a review of cleaning services at the QE hospital, because there had been 2 adverse HAI inspections in the time that I had been off. And he was concerned that there might be challenges with the cleaning. So part of my return to work plan was to look at cleaning, and there was a large piece of work done at that time, which looked at the staff resourcing levels, the hours being achieved on the floor, the cleaning standards, and the supervisory arrangement for cleaning service. That had nothing to do with Dr. Inkster escalating to me anything on cleaning. It was a piece of work that was asked to take forward by Mr. Loudon. And we found that there could be improvements in cleaning services, but one of the areas which was most challenging for us was round about discharge cleans, which is a result of the single rooms on the QE site. And we spent a lot of time working on that. What happened while I was off, I don't know what happened while I was off sick. I don't know what the cleaning standards were, but there were a number of measures taken. It was around realigning staff and adjusting hours in wards and looking at improving on standards. So although we were reporting fairly good levels of compliance against the national standards, there was still room for improvement, and that's in fact what we did as part of that piece of work. Cleaning standards in most hospitals remain they usually remain around a consistent standard, a consistent baseline standard for that hospital. and at times those standards can rise or they can temporarily fall because of resource challenges, people, for instance, reporting in sick, people taking unexpected annual leave, etc. And cleaning services is a service that needs continuous management and supervision to maintain standards.
Was that under your responsibility to make sure that happened or not?
It was the day-to-day responsibility of the general manager for the sector and the domestic manager and the site manager.
So is it possible there were still problems being encountered from time to time in 2018 as well as
Yes.
earlier?
Yes.
Yeah. Could I just ask you to look at a document just briefly? This is a fairly short one, so I won't take too much of your time with it. Bundle 14, Volume 2, at page 230. Yeah. Can we just scroll back to see if we can see the start of this exchange? Right, carry on. Yeah, but we'll just leave that document, thanks. But you accept that there may have been issues with cleaning continuing in 2018?
Yes, and individual pockets, yeah.
Now, it does lead me to another topic quite conveniently, which is one that you mentioned, I think, unprompted in relation to an earlier piece of evidence. Can we go to 458? It's this question of Dr. Inkster saying, well, Mary Ann Kane's been told not to give microbiologists any results, access to water testing results. You remember being asked about that?
Yeah, in the statement, yeah.
And you say, well, that didn't happen, but you then go on to give an explanation about one particular issue that arose. And if we look at 459, this is the point I think you told us about earlier, that Mr. Loudon told you there was a whistleblowing thing going on, and basically you were to keep out of it. And if you asked for information by any of these microbiologists, then you were to refer them to Dr. Williams. Is that right?
That's correct.
Did you find that an odd instruction to be given?
Yes, I had never been given that type of instruction in my career before. I was uncomfortable with it, but understood that it was part of a whistleblowing case, and whistleblowing cases are dealt with by a discrete groups of managers. So I took it that I had not to interact because it was being dealt with through another channel, i.e. the whistleblowing policy.
Well, can I just ask you the general question then? One of the points you've been making throughout your evidence is your lack of training, lack of specialist knowledge of water matters, and so on. And you've mentioned that on a number of occasions. One group of people who might have knowledge about water and the issues that arise with water that affect patients are the microbiologists like Dr. Inkster and Dr. Peters.
Mm-hmm.
Now, did you have occasion to, sorry, I'll change that question. Were you aware of trying to prevent them getting information?
No.
Because I think there's an inference that you were somehow And of course, everybody's perspective is no doubt different, but there's an inference that you were somehow obstructing these people from getting information that they could find useful.
I understand that that's the inference, but I would have no reason not to share that information with them because of the connection between microbiology and infection control to, in particular, water and ventilation. I later seen the whistleblowing exchange of information once Mr. Loudon had left, and it was one of the areas that concerned me particularly in relation to ventilation. I didn't understand why we didn't just share with the microbiologists when they asked for the information of Mr. Loudon what the actual air change rates were, what the provide them with a copy of the Legionella testing that had occurred on the site prior to opening. I don't see any reason why we would not share any of that information with microbiology. I never obstructed microbiology in any way or instructed any of my direct reports not to pass information on.
Can I ask you to look at bundle 11 at page 79? See if I have more luck with this one. You see on that document there, we're just looking at the short section in the middle, Ward 7B, infection control colleagues are looking at historic records. You're noted as saying no reason to obtain access to historic records. And then the response is, well, there was an expectation from infection control colleagues for testing to be undertaken. MAK will direct the issue to the Director of Medicine. And the question is, well, why is there an issue with colleagues looking at historic records? Because one view is that you're basically saying, well, why do you need to do that?
When was this? 2017?
Yep.
Next meeting's in December 2017.
Yep.
I can't answer that. I can't answer why I said that in that meeting.
Okay. Well, can I ask you to look at another one? Bundle 14, Volume 1, page 215, please. Whoops.
Sorry, my fault, Mr. Conlon. Could you give me the bundle?
14, Volume 1, page 215.
Thank you.
This is an email from right. This is an email that includes you in the addressees and says there have been positive Legionella samples, not seen any records or result of the cultures. Please provide details of the testing. Can you remember, did you provide details of the testing?
Dear Evelyn Marianne. I can't quite see that, but I think which is a request for information, and that was, when did that happen?
It is in 2015.
June 2015. So no, I would not have provided the details because I didn't have the details to provide at that time. I did not have access to water testing results. If I wanted access to them in the same way as the microbiologists were asking, I had to go to a head of maintenance. And if someone asked me for access to them, I had to direct them to a head of maintenance. I didn't have direct access to the water testing results.
Thank you. Leave that document. Can we go to 461 of your witness statement, please? Yeah, so that's the point that you're making, I think, just under the small letter H. I did not have access to water testing results. If I'd received a request, I'd have to refer it to the state's technical lead. But you didn't normally get this.
No.
No, but you were aware of the inference that for some reason or another, you were sort of getting in the way of people trying to get that information, and you don't accept that happened. Is that right?
I don't accept that I was getting in the way of people, no.
Do you know anything about the supplying of water testing results to NSS at all? Whether they were given them or not given them prior to 2018?
To NSS?
Yes.
What results from the opening of the QE, or just in general, what results being supplied to NSS?
Water testing results. That's
no.
No. Are you aware of?
Sorry, my fault. What is the question?
The question was whether the witness is aware of aware of anything about NSS not receiving water testing results until April 2018 from GGC.
I mean, another way of formulating that question is, were water testing results provided to NSS? I mean,
not that I'm aware of.
Right.
Do you know anything about Dr. Peters, who's said to have been repeatedly requesting water testing results following the emergence of the DMA Canyon report of 2015? Do you know anything about that?
No, sorry. I don't remember anything about that.
So so far as you're concerned, do you remember any such requests coming to you?
Only the one when I came back from sick leave directly to myself. I may have been CC'd into things along with various others. But I don't know. I don't recall.
Okay. Now, can we move on? You've mentioned I think what's been described as the water incident. Or at least that's what we've started to call it in 2018. And you had an involvement in that to some extent, is that correct?
Yes.
So if we look at 468, you say prior to March 18, you were unaware of concerns around water. So that's the description you were giving us a little earlier, was of the water incident having started and people are trying to work out what's going on. And then all of a sudden the DMA Canyon report appears, which nobody had mentioned. Do you remember telling us that?
Yes, yes.
And then there's a reference on 468 to the whistleblowing point that you say that was very odd. And yes, I just wanted to pick that point up with you, that you felt you had to comply with Mr. Loudon's instructions. And you say you were fearful for your continued employment.
Yes.
Why were you fearful for your continued employment in relation to that point in time?
Because I had returned from an extended period of sick leave, and at the same time I was being asked not to share information. I had just been told that should I be off work again, then there would be very serious consequences for me on a personal basis in terms of my employment.
And who said that to you?
Mr. Loudon.
And you say at the end of that paragraph with the A on it on 468 that you did your best to get to the bottom of what was going on. Is that your position?
Yeah, I did do my best at that time, yeah.
And do we find an explanation as to why you got involved? Because obviously you weren't a direct Queen Elizabeth Hospital member of staff, you had an overall role. You say you got involved because both Alan Gallagher and Ian Powery said that you need to know there's a meeting that might relate to a water incident. Is that why you joined?
That's why I joined the IMT in the March, yes.
And you say on 469 that the first thing you did was try to find out what had happened in any meetings that you'd not been at. Is that right?
That's correct.
And
So, was your joining the IMT a matter of your choice? Or were you?
Yes, I wasn't invited to the IMT, and I only found out that there was an IMT running of this nature from Mr. Gallagher and Mr. Powery. Both of them, within a couple of days, had said to me that they were concerned about it and they felt that I needed to come and attend it as a senior member of the management team because of the patient safety concerns that were being expressed.
I should know the answer to this question, but had either Mr. Gallagher or Mr. Powery attended previous meetings of the IMT?
They had been attending the meeting since January.
Right. Thank you.
now you say at the top of 469 that you realised the state's response did not seem coordinated. Just tell us about that.
So when I went to the meeting and observed and listened to what was being said, and then when I left the meeting, I immediately had a conversation with both Mr. Gallagher and Mr. Powery about what had been discussed before, what actions had been taken, if any, by the estates team. What information did we need to gather or supply for the IMT? And it became clear to me that Mr. Gallagher appeared to be carrying out activities, Mr. Powery seemed to be carrying out activities. There were certain activities that the local hospital estates team seemed to be doing, but there did not seem to be any coordination or leadership of all of those activities to get a more holistic view of all of the work that was being done in connection with the IMT. And I felt that we needed to come together as a team and start sharing that information to try to avoid duplication and to avoid unintended consequences, i.e. somebody doing something which might make the situation worse rather than better that someone else was unaware of happening at that time. So I felt that we needed as a group to be meeting and sharing that information.
And did you do something about that?
Yes, I started having an operational estates group, and the estates group was pulled together to talk about these things, to talk about each individual strand of work or task that needed to be done. Teresa Inkster then raised the issue that there were secret meetings occurring and that potentially this wasn't appropriate, at which point I was clear anybody can come along to the meeting if they like. There is nothing to hide. We are talking about operational matters, trying to get a resolution to the ongoing water safety issues.
I think Dr. Inkster would say that she didn't accuse you of having secret meetings. What she did express concern about was that she and Annette Rankin had not been included in meetings. Is that not correct?
That's not how it felt. No. However, these were operational estates meetings. These were meetings for the estates team to come together. There was nothing to come together to talk about technical solutions, to talk about future potential solutions, to try to gather information on what had happened and where the potential sources of contamination were coming from. They weren't closed meetings, but initially they were only the estates team. They were not intended to be a wider technical group, but that's what it turned into.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, that the initial bringing estates together to make sure the right hand knows what the left hand is doing. You say in your witness statement at 469 that it turned into the water technical group with a whole lot of other participants. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
Can we look at 472? Now, I think you're asked a very specific question at the top of that page. Did you have any concerns about Stenotrophomonas and patient safety? But your answer is you were concerned about the whole range of organisms and possible links to patient safety. Is that right?
That's correct. I was concerned that we had, by that stage, identified that there was Cupra vadis and now Stenotrophomonas, and as we were testing, we started to identify other organisms. I was concerned about what potentially the contamination of the water system was and how we might address with that, with there being a number of organisms identified.
And you're trying to explain, I think, in that paragraph why this was all quite stressful.
Yes. Yes, it was stressful. It was stressful for everybody involved. The estates team had no experience of these organisms. There was no reference point for us to get advice on these organisms or standards, even in regard to testing levels. If you were to test the water, what the upper and lower levels were. So it was extremely stressful in that context.
Now, I just want to touch, hopefully fairly briefly, with you on a not unconnected topic relates to water safety, which is horn taps. A couple of words you've probably seen before in the materials. Now, we know from other material that there was a meeting in 2014 when, after various discussions with various parties, a decision was made to continue to use or to continue to install horn taps. And were you involved in these discussions in 2014?
No.
And on page 472, you say that you were trying to find out what was the correct story between two different versions. Is that right?
That's correct.
And what was the key difference in the versions?
The key difference in the version was where that I had Mr. McLaughlin telling me that the health board had been instructed or told not to use the horn taps and had chosen to go against that advice, which immediately caused me concern. And I had Mr. Powrie saying there were a number of meetings and it was agreed that we would continue with these taps. It was recognised that the taps were not conforming with current guidance, and it was acknowledged that they'd been implicated in the Belfast Pseudomonas outbreak. and that the reason that they had met was this implication that they'd been connected to the Belfast Pseudomonas outbreak, where neonatal babies subsequently died, and that the purpose of the meeting was the taps had already been selected and in fact installed in most of the hospital when this was coming to light, and that there had been meetings with HPS, HFS and the health board. There had been a couple of meetings, 2 or 3 meetings, and then an SBAR had eventually been produced which agreed that the taps could stay in situ. Now that was 2 opposing views. Mr McLaughlin's view was the board was advised to remove them and had chosen not to go down that route, and therefore knew that there was a huge risk associated with them, and Mr Powery's view that whilst there was a risk associated with them, the install and keeping of the taps at the QE had in fact been agreed.
You mentioned the Belfast outbreak. Were you aware of the follow-up to the Belfast outbreak, and in particular Chief Executive's letter that had come from that?
No, I was aware of the Belfast. Well, maybe I was. The Belfast outbreak I was aware of because of the neonatal deaths. And there had been discussion with Tom Walsh, and who was the head of infection control manager, and Pamela Ioannidis, about the need for us to take action in NHS Glasgow for what is now called augmented care areas, or the areas where we have high risk patients, including neonates, but wider than neonates, and that there would need to be an education piece completed, and we would need to consider flushing of taps. There then was developed a programme which was delivered to every one of those wards by Alan Gallagher and Pamela Ioannidis, where they went through the implications with nursing staff and signed off that all staff had received that training and reported back to the water safety group. So I was aware of it from the water safety group. The DL content today, I don't know what it says. I would have been aware of it at the time, but I don't remember what it says today.
Yeah, am I right in thinking that the HFS advice continued to be not to deploy taps with flow straighteners in them following that?
Yes.
And you say that the decision that was made, okay, you weren't involved in the project team's decision as to whether to keep the taps, chuck them out, replace them with something else. That wasn't your decision. But were you not aware that the decision to retain them was, in a sense, conditional on appropriate maintenance being put in place?
I didn't know about the issue until 2018. I didn't know about the issue until Mr McLaughlin raised it with me. There was no discussion in the water technical group up until that point about the horn taps not being compliant or being a potential issue.
We heard from, I think, Mr Powery that although a decision had been taken after some investigation as to what kind of thermal disinfection would work, and plans had been put in place for the creation of a location where this could be done, by the time of the water incident, that had never actually been implemented. Do you know anything about that?
Not specifically about the implementation of the tap cleaning, but what I was aware of was that the QE had opened with no estates workshops created for them to do any tasks, and that it took some time to create those workshops, and contained within those workshops were things like ultrasonic baths and areas for pieces of equipment to be cleaned down. So I can't honestly say that I was aware that specifically missing was around about this issue, but I was aware that there was a requirement for the creation of workshops throughout the hospital to allow the staff to be able to undertake their full range of duties.
I suppose that the question I have to put to you, given the roles that you held from 2014 onwards, is this. Here we have a type of tap which has been implicated in very serious incident, a particular feature of the tap, to be precise, the flow straightener. And a decision's been taken, on the one hand, to keep it in place, on the other hand, in order to avoid, presumably, the risk that you've mentioned, an appropriate maintenance system has to be put in place, because otherwise the risk remains. Should you not have known about that, given the hats that you were wearing at the time, the need for that risk to be eliminated?
Yes, I should have.
I mean, if a particular maintenance schedule or maintenance program was necessary to retain, I think I've understood there's something of the order of 1,800 taps. That's the sort of information that would come to you. I mean, I appreciate that every detail of what's being done wouldn't necessarily come to you as interim director, but would I be right in thinking that if a particular 1,800 taps, let's say I'm right about that figure, required a particular cleaning regime as a condition of their continued use, that's the sort of level of information that an interim director should be aware of if that is happening.
Yes.
Thank you.
Just a point of detail. That you probably know that there's a debate about should the water technical group have been reporting to the IMT that was in place at the time or not? And are you now saying that on reflection you should have arranged for some kind of communication between the water technical group and the IMT?
I'm saying in hindsight that should have happened and we should have reported in that way. The water technical group was not established as a subgroup of the IMT. It was established initially as an operational group, and then others were added to it, and it became what was then referred to as the water technical group. So it was never formally put in place as a subgroup of the IMT. And with hindsight and on reflection, it should have been, and it should have reported on a routine basis, and the minutes should have been shared. But at the time, that's not what happened.
Was this, I mean, we've heard from other witnesses about the water technical group. And one of the questions you were asked, and I'll show you the page in a second, is basically how did people get on at these meetings, obviously in a difficult situation? And you described them as quite difficult. Is that right?
Yes.
I think that's on page 480. You say atmosphere was extremely difficult due to the pressure of work, scale of problem, lack of clarity on where the potential sources of contamination were coming from in order to identify a solution. And then you mentioned the novelty of the issues and the fact that the press were interested as other factors. Is that right?
Yes.
Did the water technical group conclude that the water was contaminated, the hospital water?
Yes.
Did the group reach a conclusion as to what the source of that contamination was?
Not while I was chairing it.
Did the group have a view on what the impact of that contamination was or might be on the patient population?
The contamination was considered to be the source of where the patient bacteremias were coming from.
Thank you. Bear with me a moment, Ms.
Maybe I
Kane.
can ask a question. When you use the word contamination, what do you mean?
That there was a microbiological contamination of the system. In other words, that there was organisms, alert organisms, and organisms in the water. That's the contamination. But there were also things like debris, the water technical group discovered within the water system. And when we looked at the tanks, we discovered a sponge in one of the tanks. So there were other sources of contamination. We found valves that were rusty. Rust can be a contaminant of your water system and encourage growth. Microbiological growth. So there were a number of reasons to say that the system was contaminated. It was both contaminated with debris particles and the sponge, and it was also contaminated with microbiology, alert organisms.
You mentioned alert organisms. These are the organisms that are specifically mentioned in the National Infection Control Manual. Am I right?
Yes, that's correct.
But if I noted you correct, in explaining what you meant by contamination, you meant the presence of alert organisms and other organisms. Did I note that correctly?
That's what I said, sir.
Yes. And what did you understand either what these organisms were or what was their significance?
So at the time where organisms were being identified linked to patient bacteremia, the reason we looked was because there was patient bacteremias from potentially sources that could be linked to the built environment. So those are the alert organisms. However, when we looked further, we found that there were other organisms where there were no patient bacteremias identified. So there were other organisms in the water, although that had not manifested as a bacteremia in a patient. And those are the organisms I'm talking about. But most of those organisms were alert. I'm sorry that that's the way that I've put that. I've put it over wrongly.
Mm-hmm. No, not necessarily. And I take it you're discussing specifically the situation in early 2018.
Yes.
Yes, right. If anyone was to suggest to you that there was no contamination of the water, the water system in 2018, what would your response be?
There had to be some form of contamination in some way, because there were organisms contained within the water system that subsequently caused patient bacteremia.
Do you recollect anyone suggesting in 2018, either in the water, in the context of the meetings of the water technical group or any other meeting that you had with colleagues, that there was no contamination of the water system?
I don't remember that at all.
Right. Thank you.
Can I move you to a topic other than water for the moment, if I may, ventilation? And in terms of hospital ventilation requirements and so on and so forth, you don't claim to be an expert in that either, is that right?
That's correct.
Although in a number of your answers, you clearly understand phrases like commissioning and validation and verification, is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, if we go to 486 of your witness statement, thank you, we find there a section starting on commissioning and validation of ventilation. And you first asked about an email that Mr. Walsh had asked for about confirmation of commissioning and validation, and he got a reply from someone called Francis Rath. Remember that happening?
Yes.
And then you're asked, well, wearing your hat, were you aware of any concerns? Now, this is fairly early on in the opening of the building to patients, any concerns about ventilation and commissioning. And you say on page 487, you're aware of concerns about isolation rooms and Ward 4B. Isolation room locations, air change and pressure regimes are unclear. A number of clinical teams, including ICD, trying to understand what facilities were in the hospital to address patient isolation requirements. Then you say the easiest way to do that is to ask for the commissioning, validation, and specifications of the rooms.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you know if that information was readily available? Commissioning, validation, specifications of the rooms that people were interested in.
Well, I know now that it wasn't readily available. But at that time, I assumed it was readily available.
So you assumed it was readily available, but you didn't have that information directly yourself because you thought that would be dealt with by the project team. Is that right?
No, I didn't. That's correct. I didn't have that information myself.
Now, one of the topics that I mentioned to you a minute ago was validation as opposed to commissioning. Do you know what validation is, just in general terms, of a ventilation system?
Yes, validations when so the system's been commissioned. Each individual part of the system has been commissioned as per the and checked as per the design. Validation looks at the whole system as a whole and ensures that all of the components of that system are delivering the final output that you expect from the design. That's a very simplistic way of putting it.
Now, you've asked on page 490 whether within the remit that you had, you should have sought reassurance that validation had been carried out. And you say there, well, I should have done, but I relied on verbal updates from Mr. Powery, who I think may have got it from Mr. Loudon. Is that right?
Yeah.
Because you say there are consequent possible risk if it's not been done. And you touch on permeability tests which hadn't been done. We've already touched on HEPA filters earlier. So we go to 492 to see your view on this. At the foot of the page, if validation was not in place at handover, how did the hospital open? Who would have had the authority to allow it to open? And you say you don't know. Shouldn't have opened to patients without validation. Only the CEO would have had authority to make that decision, but you doubt any CEO would make that decision if they were aware a critical system validation had not been completed. So do you know why the hospital was opened without validation having been done?
Absolutely not. I don't know why the hospital was opened with validation not done. No, I don't.
Can I ask you to look at bundle 12, page 263, please?
Just a matter of detail, Ms. Kane. In that last question and answer, when you were talking about validation, I understood from your answer that you had in mind all systems in the hospital as opposed to any specific system. Am I right?
No critical systems. The ventilation for the hospital should have been as national standards,
Yeah.
but in particular, you validate what's classed as critical ventilation systems. Those that have the biggest impact on the highest risk patients is what you validate. They tend to be areas like theatres, so it's not just isolation rooms. There's areas like theatres. There may be some ITUs. Neonatal units. There's various areas in a hospital which have an increased level of ventilation and are classed as critical systems. Those are normally validated and then verified on an annual basis. But at some point, all of the systems should have been looked at in their totality and checked.
Right. So that's very helpful. So you're aware when we're talking about validation that as far as ventilation systems are concerned, SHTM 0301 requires validation, in
Yes.
contrast, perhaps, to 0401, which does not have a specific requirement for validation. So when Mr. Connell uses the word validation, you are understanding it to be used in a specific sense in relation to ventilation.
Yes.
But you added that you would expect all systems also to have been validated, or have I got that wrong?
No, what I'm saying is also, yes, well, any air handling unit that's fitted in any part of the hospital should have been commissioned and validated at the point that it was connected. It would not necessarily be the case that on an annual basis you would go back in and verify those systems. You would only go back in and verify the systems which were classed as critical systems.
Right.
So every air handling unit should have been commissioned and validated, i.e. checked that it was working and checked that it was working up to the standard it was meant to.
Right. Thank you.
I'm just looking at what you say in this email chain that's in front of us now on the document we have on screen, where you say it is imperative that we get the validation data now for all HEPA filtered areas of the hospital. We're at risk of losing all of the areas from use unless we can provide this data, which will be a PR nightmare for the board. Why was it going to be a PR nightmare?
Because we had already populated the hospital with patients. This was a significant patient safety issue. It needed to be addressed quickly. It would have meant that we would needed to have escalated to the Scottish Government, the Health Board and various other parties, and that there would be a high degree of media scrutiny. But for me, the biggest issue was there would have been a complete loss of confidence in the general public in the hospital and the safety concerned with the hospital. I also didn't see, I couldn't understand why the information wouldn't be available just to hand over in any case.
Yeah, because at that point you were assuming it was just sitting and metaphorically on somebody's desk somewhere, and somebody just had
Correct.
to say, "Oops, here it is. Have a look."
Yes.
Yeah. And I think you told us earlier, and I'll identify this now in your witness statement. If we go to 494, please. I think you said that this was the one thing that jumped out at me that you wanted to mention, that you wanted to mention to the CEO when you became interim director, what your biggest concern was, why information hadn't been provided. Is that right?
Yes.
You say in the paragraph on page 494, when I returned from sick leave and in August 2017 and saw the request for information from the whistleblowers, I could not understand why clear answers were not being provided on commissioning and validation data to inform clinical decision making. When the CEO asked me during a one-to-one meeting around March, when I became interim director, what my biggest concern was, my response was the ventilation, and I did not feel we had responded fully. Did you understand why the information hadn't been provided?
No. At that stage, no.
Thank you. Now, I don't think you were much involved in the works on Ward 4B, from what you say in your statement. Can I just take you to one of the issues that arose in relation to 2A and 2B, which was the decant into 6, or 6A and 4B to be precise, which you deal with on page 500. You seem to have some, you explain what was going on, and you say near the foot of page 500 that you raised concerns, largely amounting, I think, to saying, well, if there's a problem with the water, it's the same water in 6A, and if there's a problem with the ventilation, it's no better in 6A, or words to that effect. Is that right?
Yes. I was concerned that we were moving patients from one level of risk to an equivalent or potentially to a higher risk.
And who did you raise these concerns with?
I spoke about it at the executive water oversight group. I think I mentioned it to the CEO, and I also raised it in the IMT.
Because what you record at page 501 of your witness statement is that then you stopped being invited, basically, to IMTs.
That's what it felt like, yes.
Did you follow that up?
No.
Because you've raised concerns to various people, and next thing you find is you're not going to the IMTs anymore. I mean, what response did you get to the people that you raised the concerns with?
They took it on board and prepared clinical risk assessments, and the decision was made that that's where the patients were being moved to.
We're almost heading towards the conclusion of your evidence. You'll be pleased to know I just have a couple more things to ask you about, hopefully fairly briefly.
Perhaps, can I just check up on a date? You were asked about the proposal to decant patients from 2A and 2B to, as I understand it, Ward 6A. And you explained to Mr. Connell your concerns about that, and you articulated these concerns to the CEO, also at an IMT, and what was the other group?
The Water Oversight Board.
Right, the Water Oversight Board.
Yeah, which was the Chief Operating Officer, The external ventilation expert had begun to get involved in water safety at that point as well. We met regularly so that it was so that there was a route for me to escalate any concerns and discuss any concerns when the chief executive wasn't available.
Right. So this is the end of or after September 2018. Now, you went on to explain that you stopped attending the IMTs because you were not invited. Is that, when did that happen?
I felt it happen. I can't tell you the date that happened. I did attend two in October. I don't remember why I attended them, but I felt as if I was dismissed for raising concern.
So whenever it was you stopped attending, sometime towards the end of 2018?
Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Now, I'm going to take some of the other items reasonably short from you, and then we'll probably have a short break. On page 502, you've asked about reports prepared into wards 2A and 2B by a company called Innovative Design Solutions. And you say that you think you had instructed these reports, is that right?
Yes.
And your reasoning for doing so, I think, appears at the top of 503, where you say, despite the passage of time, there are still concerns about whether the ventilation was up to scratch.
Yes.
And interesting point you then make. By that stage, I had little confidence in the information I had seen in correspondence with the technical advisors, Multiplex, and the project team and director, which was always defensive and contradicted anyone else's viewpoint. Now, no doubt different people can have different views on the matter, but the project team and director were all GGC people, were they not?
Yeah.
But by that time, you weren't confident in what you were getting.
No, I wasn't confident in what I was getting. Particularly around about ventilation, when I considered what had happened with the PPVL rooms and the time it had taken us to get the isolation rooms sorted out, even basic information like even knowing where they were and what the parameters in which they operated on, I felt no, I had lost confidence.
No, but by that time, of course, the project team had dissolved. But is that a reference when you refer to the director at the top of page 503? Is that a reference to Mr. Loudon?
Yes.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just going to ask you really one question. You asked in your witness statement about Cryptococcus, which led to its own series of meetings and so on and so forth. Now, you say that you weren't really involved in that, is that right?
That's correct.
Did you not attend various meetings about it?
I think I attended one meeting.
Were you involved in the action plan coming from the Cryptococcus meetings?
Not that I recall at all, no.
You asked general questions thereafter 506 about staffing levels, and we've heard a lot about that already, and I don't want to go back over all of it. You asked about training on 507. I suppose the simple question is, were you aware what the state of training in technical subjects was for the people under your control when you took on the interim director role?
No.
But
Not in the States.
you later discovered that the training wasn't what you would have liked to see. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
and there were various reasons for that. And then in page 510, 511, you're talking about some of the working hours that were experienced by the team that was working under your control 6 or 7 days a week, often 14, 16-hour days. Is that right?
Yeah.
Now, when you narrate that material, is that material you've gained directly from speaking to the people involved?
That what I've written is my experience and what I observed.
Thank you. You're asked, as a lot of witnesses are, when you get to the end of the statement, well, thanks very much for all these answers. Is there anything you want to add that you might think would be helpful to the inquiry? And you deal with that on page 513. And you say there the estates team worked as hard as they could. And then you say a couple of lines further on, the situation they faced with was untenable. Is that an exaggeration, or is that what you feel? Might take a short break just now. Anyway, I'm close to the end of matters I'd like to put to this witness.
Do you want to take this opportunity to check if there's any more questions?
I'll do that while we're
Right.
offline.
Well, we just, I mean, to give Miss Kane an indication, shall we decide that we will sit again at what, maybe 10 to 4? Right. Well, on the basis that I have been able to give an indication to Miss Kane, which I may not have, we will sit again at 10 to 4. Unless, Mr. Connell, you feel that we need to, we have more to do than that timing would allow.
No, we'll work on that basis now.
Right.
Thank you,
Mr.
Malone.
Connell.
Thank you for coming back, Ms. Kane. I have a small number of hopefully shortish questions for you. That they're in a little bit of a random order, so please just forgive me for that. Can I just ask one general question first of all? Then you've described the issues that you had with challenges over any proper planned preventative maintenance in the building, for the reasons you've explained to us very fully. Now that must have given you concern that not doing things in that way was possibly putting patients at risk. What kind of things did you do to try to mitigate that risk, if any?
I repeatedly asked Alan Gallagher and Ian Powery and Andy Wilson when he was in post as well, and Billy Hunter, if we were doing enough to keep the patients safe. I was extremely worried. I was extremely worried about this in particular. I authorised payments, which there really was no budget to authorise, so that things would be done. And I worried a huge amount.
Okay. Can I ask you a very specific question, if I can? Remember we were talking about horn taps and the issues about thermal maintenance and so on, because they had these flow straighteners in that had been implicated in the Northern Ireland outbreak. I'm told there was a standing operating procedure, an SOP, prepared, which required 6-month sampling of any area where taps with flow straighteners were operating. First of all, were you aware there was an SOP to that effect?
No, I wasn't aware there was an SOP to that effect.
Yeah. So you wouldn't
was this SOP created after the S-bar was created?
It'll be in April 15, I'm told.
So after the decision was made to keep them? No, I didn't know about that.
In the course of being asked about contamination of the water system,
Sorry, Mr. Connell, it's the question rather than the answer. So what you were putting to Ms. Kane was there was an SOP, a standard operating procedure, which required what?
Sampling every 6 months of areas where taps with flow straighteners were in use.
Of it, right, of areas where taps with flow straighteners
had been installed and were operational, if I can put it that way.
I take it that's pretty well all over the hospital.
Well, it will have been. But I think the idea was that there should be samples taken if these taps were in use, given the issues that have been identified with them.
Thank you.
In the course of giving us a description about the water technical group and what was found and contamination and so on, I think you may have said something about contamination and the link to bacteriemia. Is that, the question of whether the contamination did or did not cause particular infections, is that something within your expertise?
No, not at all.
Thank you. Now, I tried to ask you a question earlier about a document, and it's entirely my fault. I got the wrong document because I had the wrong document number. I think I might now have the right one, which is Bundle 14, Volume 1, page 214. You remember I was asking you about this question of giving water testing results to people.
Yes.
This appears to be an email from you to Christine Peters, copied to various other people, saying, why are you writing to Heather and myself about this? Ian Powery is the Sector Estates Manager with responsibility. We've shared this data via sector water groups involved, various other people and so on. It's a water policy which describes the governance and arrangements. Somebody can take you through these arrangements. Now, depending on your perspective, could that be viewed as you basically expressing the suggestion that they should go away with their water testing requests because there are routes for getting these which are not coming to you and asking for them?
Yes, I'm sorry. It's a really cheeky email and I shouldn't have written it like that. However, that was after being instructed to respond in that way and refer her back to Craig Williams in particular. But on reading that, I'm sorry about that. That's a very cheeky email.
Now that's an email dated on the 1st of July 2015.
Yeah, I don't think at that time you'd been told, had
No,
you?
I hadn't been, no.
That's much earlier than being told there's a whistleblowing thing going.
Yeah,
Don't pass on
it is.
information.
It is.
But in any event, you accept that it's perhaps an unhelpful response, if I can put it that way?
I do.
And can I just ask you, finally, from almost finally with my questions, this business of being told to refer matters somewhere else because of the whistleblowing, can we just get up 459 of your witness statement, please? Thank you. Now, you see the answer near the top. Mr. Loudon advised me if I was contacted, I was not to provide this, but referred them to Craig Williams. Now, this was said to be in August 2017, so this is when you come back having been off.
Yeah.
But was Craig Williams not long gone by then from the hospital? Did he not?
No, Craig Williams left around about that time.
Did he not left, say in 2016? Just, I'm being asked to check if that's what you were actually told.
That is absolutely what I was told.
So, whatever the date of Professor Williams' departure, that's what you recollect being told.
Yes.
Okay. Well, if I can just come back then to the question I was asking you before the short break, and this is the last point I just want to give you the opportunity of dealing with. You was explaining to me that the position the Estates people had found was untenable. And then I was going to say on page 513, you said that they were made to feel that their opinions were worthless. Is that what you feel?
On many occasions, that's how I feel, yes. I feel that the way we were working, pace we were working at, the uncertainty of what each day would bring in terms of, something not working that we didn't know about the day before, and the number issues was going to inevitably lead to making either flawed decisions or making mistakes that would result in adverse consequences. I feel that we were stretched. I've never been in a team that's been so stretched and under such a great deal of pressure as that team was at that time, and that was everybody working in that hospital, in estates and facilities. It was very, very, very demanding.
Thank you very much. I have no further questions for you.
Ms. Kane, that is now the end of your questioning, and therefore you are free in a moment to turn off your computer if that's what you want to do. But before you do that, can I thank you for the work you put in providing answers to the questionnaire, which allows us to provide a witness statement, which is an important part of your evidence. And thank you for giving evidence today. I'm very grateful for it. For that, it will be helpful to the work of the inquiry. So thank you, but you're now free to log off. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, next week.
Yes, my lord. Things have been going on while I've been in this chair, and I regret to report that the previous arrangements for Monday to be occupied with the evidence of Mr. Fernie have not materialised because, without going into the details, Mr. Fernie cannot readily make himself available on Monday, and we have not been able to make arrangements for an alternative witness. So although I much regret the situation, I'm afraid I'm not in a position to present any evidence on Monday. The current proposal is that Mr. Fernie will now give evidence on Wednesday afternoon of next week instead of Monday, and Mr. Redmond, who was scheduled to give evidence on that date, has been asked if he can move to the Wednesday the 28th, in other words, the week after, in the afternoon. That slot was nominally occupied by Mr. O'Donovan of Mercury. That is still an open issue as to Mr. O'Donovan's availability at all, and further information will be issued as soon as we have it.
Right. Well, if we have no witness for Monday, we will not sit on Monday. I regret that situation, but you've heard what Mr. Connell has to say. We will, in that case, sit again on Tuesday of next week at 10 o'clock. So if I can wish everyone a good weekend, and I look forward to see you next week.